Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and this week we have a lot of news about upcoming Apple products as far as iPhone 15, Apple's own displays, iOS 17 devices, touchscreen Macs, and much more. This is your news update for the week of January 16th, 2023. Now, the MacBook Air was introduced 15 years ago yesterday, so it's hard to believe the MacBook Air is that old, and this is the most recent version and will probably have this design for quite some time. But amazingly, 15 years ago is when Apple introduced the incredibly, seemingly impossibly thin MacBook Air. I remember going to the store, looking at one and thinking, I can't believe this is that strong, being that it's that thin. I'd never seen any laptop that thin before. Now, Tim Cook is actually taking a pay cut this year based on shareholder feedback and most likely economic concerns. Last year, he made about $100 million, and this year he'll be compensated about $49 million. So that's a ton of money either way, and I'm sure he has nothing to worry about, but it looks like he's going to be taking a pay cut. And speaking of shareholders, the shareholder meeting for Apple will take place on March 10th. Usually right after the shareholder meeting, there's actually an update, maybe the day after or the next day or later that week, sometimes announcing a new event. So we could see events right after that. That's typically what Apple's done in the past. They wait for the shareholder meeting and then push an event after that. Eddie Q, who's in charge of Apple services and has been at Apple for over 30 years, had a newsroom story recently stating that 2022 was a groundbreaking year for entertainment. He actually says in this article, there's much more to come. Moments to anticipate, enjoy, and reflect upon. Moments that will have us jumping up with excitement at the edge of our seats or that make us want to get up and dance. Moments that can create lasting memories and bring us closer to one another. So you can see more about everything he said here, where they have 900 million paid subscriptions across Apple services, 320 billion paid to developers selling digital goods and services since 2008. So a lot more information here. I'll link this in the description, but you'll see it talks about Apple Arcade and much, much more. It's quite a comprehensive article with pages and pages of information about Apple Maps, the store, and more. Now, California is getting ready for digital IDs. This is something many states have been waiting for and countries. So if we go into Apple Wallet, if you go to add a card, you'll see driver's license or state ID. And currently there's only 3 options: Arizona, Colorado, and Maryland. California is getting ready to launch their IDs, and it should be coming to iPhone, but they also did say to expect California to do it differently and what they think to be the best. So we should see many more states in the future or different countries, but this is completely up to your local government to work with Apple to get this implemented. So it could be some time depending on where you live, what state you're in, or what country you're in. Now, an app called Retropod was recently on the App Store and has been removed. So if you go looking for it, it was actually something that went viral on TikTok, and Retropod is no longer there. It was basically a version of the iPod video that we've had for a long time that someone put over the top of the interface of the iPhone so you could listen to music. It was something I think Apple should allow, but either way, it looks like they've removed it. If you've been using it or if you have it, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Recently, the New York Post has said that Apple has been collecting feedback from emergency dispatch centers about false notifications from those using iPhone 14 and Apple Watches with crash detection, where it's actually setting it off accidentally, whether you're skiing down a slope or riding a roller coaster. So under emergency SOS, there's been some changes here, but it looks like Apple is still trying to get it right as far as detecting overall emergencies and crashes altogether. So it will call by itself, and they're reaching out to those dispatch centers to see what maybe they could do differently. Now, one of Apple's display manufacturers, BOE, is apparently working on building a $250 million factory in North Vietnam, as Apple continues to move much of its supply chain out of China to diversify it around the world. Much of the overall supply chain is sort of set to switch to India and other places, where 50% of its current manufacturing will be moved out of China within a few years, it seems. So as Apple starts to diversify around the world, different chip factories in the USA, South Korea, and all over the world. Tomorrow, we're expecting Apple to have a product announcement. On Twitter, on Front Page Tech, John Prosser said, keep an eye on Apple's newsroom tomorrow. Apple's newsroom is where Apple announces products if they're not planning a full event. We're expecting Apple to update MacBook Pros with the M2 chipset they introduced with this MacBook Air and the 13-inch MacBook Pro. We're expecting an M2 Pro, an M2 Max, and maybe an M2 Ultra, with the 14 and 16-inch MacBook getting an update, maybe the Mac Studio with an M2 Ultra, and a Mac Mini and iMac update with M2s as well. So it could just be a small processor increase or some spec bumps, and that's typically why we wouldn't see a full event. We can expect that full event a little bit later with new products. So it makes a lot of sense that they would just introduce that on Apple's newsroom. So look for that tomorrow. Now, the recent deals this week, I'll continue to post them in the description below, but since we're not really in a holiday season, there's continuous deals on things such as AirPods Pro 2, AirPods Max, and all sorts of other things. As I find different deals, I'll post them in the description of this video so you can check them out. They're affiliate links, so I will get a little bit of commission for that. If you don't want that, you can search for those different products just on Amazon or other places as well. But again, I'll link those deals. I just want to bring those up if you're looking for the most recent Apple products. There's an ongoing issue I've mentioned a couple times with the iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max, where if you turn off the display, turn it back on, or pick it up, sometimes horizontal lines will appear on the display itself. Apple has apparently acknowledged this in a memo stating Apple will fix it with an upcoming software update. So we can expect an update very, very soon. However, today is a holiday in the United States, and Apple is honoring Martin Luther King, and it's Martin Luther King Day in the United States, so many schools are off, and it's a vacation day for many people, and you can see a tribute to him on apple.com. So you can see here, read more about his life. It says, read Stride Toward Freedom for free, and you can see just a little honorable mention of him here that it says, this is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So you'll see that if you go to apple.com today. So that leads me to believe we'll have some sort of update as soon as tomorrow. Now, tomorrow could be a beta release and then a public release later. Last year, Apple released iOS 15.3.1 on a Thursday, on the 12th of January. So far, we haven't seen any updates. So we could see an update this week, hopefully to the public, to address those issues with the horizontal lines and the mountain of bugs, it seems, that are in iOS 16.2. I talked about that the other day in a follow-up video that I post on Saturdays typically, and more of you are complaining about just weird random issues throughout iOS. So hopefully we see something address that, and then we'll move on to iOS 16.3. We could expect iOS 16.3 Beta 3 or release candidate this week. Last year, we only had 2 betas and then a release candidate. This year, we could see the same, or Apple could push this out a little while, get iOS 16.3 to really fix a lot of bugs, security updates, and more, and then push it out later in the month, or maybe February or even March at this point. Some rumors are actually saying to expect it in March. So if they work on it like that to get it ready, we could see many more betas until 16.3 releases. Either way, I would expect that soon. Now, iOS 17 is expected to bring less changes this year. This makes me think Apple could be working on a major redesign, or they could just be working on stability overall. So far, with iOS 16.3, we haven't seen a ton of changes or updates. It could be more of a bug fix update, and it seems like they could be more focused on Reality OS or XR OS that's for that new AR/VR headset. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. And as far as supported devices for iOS 17, so far we're not hearing anything different as far as expecting it to change and just support the same devices. However, if Apple does a major redesign of some sort and is really pushing augmented reality, we could see a big change, and maybe they'll only support iPhone XS and newer or something else. But Apple has not put anything down yet. There's very few information or very little information about it. And so I wouldn't expect too many changes there hopefully this year. Now, iPhone 15 is expected to get a price increase according to sources on Weibo. Last month, we heard Apple could cut the cost because the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus are just not selling that well. But that could be because they're so similar to what you had before, and the 13 Pro Max would be a better option if it was the same price. So based on that, and also based on the Apple truly planning to use titanium on the Pro models, it means the manufacturing costs, materials, and tooling would increase as well. They would pass that on to the consumer. So it makes a lot of sense that if it is in fact made out of titanium, whether that be an iPhone 15 Ultra or the Pro models, the price could go up. Maybe they'll reduce the price on the regular model and then bump the price on the Pro models. But either way, it makes sense if it's titanium that the price would go up. There's been more and more information about the upcoming upcoming iPhone 15 buttons being solid state or just haptic buttons that don't physically press but are more like what we have with the trackpad on the Mac or the home button on the iPhone 8 Plus, where you just press it, or even the SE. You press it, it feels as though you're pressing it, but it's not actually moving. According to Ming-Chi Kuo this time, he reiterated that Apple will have haptic or solid state buttons instead of physical buttons, and instead use two haptic engines for that feedback. So you could have a haptic engine at the top of the phone and one at the bottom, where we typically have one on iPhone. So we could see that difference. That would help with water intrusion, better IP rating, and just hopefully less to break overall. I don't think we've had button issues for quite some time, maybe since iPhone 4 or 4S or even 5, but this would again help make it more durable over time. Now, there's even rumors about iPhone 16 already. That's something that I really didn't expect. We haven't even seen the iPhone 15, but according to the elect, iPhone 16 could have an under-the-screen Face ID sensor. So we've heard this before. Apple would still have to keep the dynamic island somehow, or maybe they could get rid of it and it would just be a 1 or 2 year thing. But either way, we would have the forward-facing camera. So I don't think Apple would do that until they fully figure out how to cover everything. Maybe have it switch just when you're using the camera or something else. But according to the elect, Apple's working on Face ID under the display. Now, in the most recent Power On newsletter by Mark Gurman, he said that Apple has been working on their own displays since 2017, just like they did with Apple Silicon with their A-series processors and M-series in the Mac. The new micro-LED displays would start with the Apple Watch in 2024, or according to Ross Young, 2025, and be expanded to the iPhone and Mac at a later date. It would give increased efficiency, better color accuracy, and more control over the display itself. So instead of just telling Samsung we want a bunch of these displays at this spec, they would give them the actual makeup and overall construction of the display itself. So micro LED is something that we saw a lot at the recent CES or Consumer Electronics Show that I went to this past a week or two ago at this point, and that's something we saw a lot of micro LED displays. That's the next tech after OLED that has the same benefits but should be more color accurate over time. So we could see those come to iPhone in the next few years, but there's no planned date 100% yet, but Apple is working on it. And it makes sense that they would want to control everything from the processor to the display and more. Apple is still planning on augmented reality for its integration into stores using the app. So you would use the Apple Store app, go in, and then point it using the augmented reality option at maybe an object, and it would give you more information. The price, all the specs about it, and more using just the camera. We've seen this with some different implementations across different devices, but if they're coming out with an AR or VR headset, it makes sense that they would want to integrate that into iPhone as well. This could come before that update with the headset, or it could come a little bit later. But either way, Mark Gurman has said that it's ready to go, and we're hearing more and more about that. And speaking of the latest AR/VR headset news, in the latest software updates for Windows 11, where we have Apple Music, Apple TV, and Apple devices in beta, Aaron P613 on Twitter has found references in the code of the applications mentioning RealityOS and XROS again. So it's in the code, Apple's already referencing it, we've heard it for quite some time, and now we're just waiting for the product to see what the operating system is like and more. Now we're waiting for new iPads, and it looks like the larger than 12.9-inch iPad may be pushed away or pushed back, and instead we'll just have 12.9 instead of 14-inch or larger. I would love to see larger iPads as long as they have more Mac integration, but either way, it looks like Apple may be instead working on a touchscreen Mac. So that touchscreen Mac is something they're working on, and apparently Apple's changed its mind, and these would be OLED-based touchscreen Macs, according to Mark Gurman, who says Apple is actively engaged in the project and reconsidering an offering of a touchscreen. I polled many of you on YouTube to see if you would want a touchscreen Mac, so let's take a look at what you said since I ran that a couple days ago. And you can see here on Twitter, the poll says, would you want a touchscreen Mac? 35% said yes, 65% said no, and that's out of 6,250 votes. So a lot of people don't seem to find the need for it. I think I would use it just maybe for scrolling from time to time. After switching from an iPhone or an iPad going to a Mac, sometimes I find myself reaching for the screen. I don't know that it's necessary, but it would be nice if it was just there overall. Also, Apple's first OLED display-based MacBook could launch launch as soon as 2024, according to Ming-Chi Kuo. It would allow for a thinner display and a lighter display, improved battery life as well, since it can turn off those pixels, and I'm not sure I would really welcome this until I know more about the PWM, or controlling of the brightness. Apple typically uses DC dimming on their Pro or Pro Max displays, where the brightness is controlled by flickering the screen faster and slower. You can't see it with your eyes, but it can cause eye strain and headaches and more, and I've experienced that with phones. However, in Macs, not typically. You don't really see that, so I would really want to know more about that. Usually, if they are using PWM, it's at a high enough rate it shouldn't bother anyone. But either way, we could see an OLED-based MacBook and then probably a switch to micro LED in the future if Apple is indeed making its own displays. Mark Gurman this week also noted that the upcoming Apple Silicon-based Mac Pros are in testing and running a future version of macOS on version 13.3. Since we can expect this version later this spring, it makes sense that Apple could launch the new Mac Pro alongside the update. Currently, macOS 13.2 is in testing, and we could see 13.3 updated in March or a little bit later. So it makes sense that in a few months we could see those Mac Pros come out finally. Although we don't expect a major update to the design, we do expect some bumps in specs with some different options as far as placing different cards inside the overall container or overall case. Now, as far as AirPods, well, AirPods Max have been around for some time, but Apple is apparently set to launch a new pair, but next year. So this year it looks like we wouldn't get new AirPods Max, but next year we would get AirPods Max, maybe AirPods Max 2 with a slight redesign. We've seen a little bit about that. And then after that, we could also have a lower priced AirPods down to $99, all according to Ming-Chi Kuo. So we could now have a cheaper version of AirPods. Instead of AirPods Max, AirPods Pro, and AirPods 3, we could have a budget version as well. Apple's not typically known for doing budget things, but hopefully they have a lower offering or they can lower the price of AirPods 3. But let me know your thoughts about all of this in the comments below and what you're looking most forward to. Of course, I'll link this wallpaper in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.